I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset over my 10-acre property in rural Colorado when I noticed the construction crew pulling up to my stable with a truck full of folding chairs and tables. That was the exact moment I knew my peaceful life in Eagle Ridge Estates was about to become a nightmare. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had bought this property 3 years ago specifically because it sat on the edge of the HOA boundary. The developer had carved out this section as a rural exception zone, which meant I got all the perks of the community's maintained roads and snow removal, but with minimal restrictions on what I could do with my land. I had horses, chickens, and most importantly, a private well system that I had spent $45,000 drilling and installing when I first moved in. The municipal water line didn't extend this far out, so the well was my lifeline. I stood up from my chair and walked across the property toward the stable, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. The construction crew was unloading equipment like they owned the place. A woman in her mid-40s with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," was directing them with aggressive hand gestures. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that looked completely ridiculous for a rural Colorado evening, and she had a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a weapon. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "What exactly is going on here?" The woman turned to me with a smile so fake I could see the cracks in it from 10 feet away. "Oh, you must be Marcus. I'm Brenda Hutchins, the president of the Eagle Ridge Estates HOA. We're just setting up for our monthly meeting." I felt my jaw tighten. "In my stable." "Well, technically it is the community stable now," Brenda said, consulting her clipboard. "According to the amended bylaws that were passed last month, any structure within the HOA boundaries that could serve community purposes can be designated for shared use. Your stable was voted on as the perfect location for our meeting since the community center is undergoing renovations." I stared at her in disbelief. "This is private property, my property. I built this stable for my horses." Brenda's smile widened, but her eyes went cold. "If you had attended the HOA meeting last month, you would have known about the vote. All residents were notified via email 3 weeks in advance. Since you didn't object during the comment period, the motion passed unanimously." "I didn't get any email," I said, pulling out my phone. "And even if I did, you cannot just take over someone's private property." "It is not a takeover," Brenda said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my blood pressure spike. "It is shared community use. You will still have access to your stable, just not during our scheduled meeting times. We meet twice a month and we will only need the space for a few hours each time." One of the construction workers, a younger guy with a tool belt, looked uncomfortable. He glanced at me and then at Brenda. "Ma'am, if this is a property dispute, maybe we should not be here until it gets sorted out." Brenda shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "We have authorization from the HOA board. Continue with the setup." I stepped between them and the stable door. "No, you do not. This is my building on my land, and I am telling you right now to leave." Brenda pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Let me read you the exact text of the bylaw amendment. Section 12. Paragraph 4 states that any agricultural structure within 500 feet of a community road can be designated for temporary community use if it meets safety and accessibility standards. Your stable is 420 feet from Eagle Ridge Drive, which is a community-maintained road. "That is insane," I said. "You cannot just make up rules that let you steal people's property." "We are not stealing anything," Brenda replied. "And if you continue to obstruct legitimate HOA business, you will be fined $250 per day for non-compliance. The fines are also outlined in the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased your property." I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. "I need to see documentation of all of this. The original bylaws I signed when I bought this place said nothing about shared community use of private structures." Brenda smiled again, and this time there was a hint of triumph in it. The bylaws include a clause that allows for amendments with a majority vote of the board and a notice period to residents. Everything we have done is completely legal. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a meeting starting in 90 minutes, and we need to finish setting up. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos of everything. The workers, the trucks, Brenda's face. She noticed and her expression soured. You cannot prevent us from conducting HOA business, Marcus. If you try to interfere, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action against you. Get off my property, I said flatly. Right now. Brenda sighed dramatically and turned to the workers. Continue with the setup. If Mr. Webb physically prevents you from doing your jobs, call the police and report him for harassment and obstruction. I felt trapped. If I physically removed them, I would be the one in trouble. If I let them stay, I was setting a precedent that they could just walk all over me whenever they wanted. I decided to call the non-emergency police line right there in front of all of them. The dispatcher answered after 3 rings, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The woman on the other end sounded sympathetic but ultimately told me it was a civil matter and that I would need to sort it out with a lawyer. She said an officer could come by to make sure things stayed peaceful, but they could not force anyone to leave without clear evidence of trespassing. And if the HOA had documentation claiming legitimate access, it became a legal gray area. I hung up feeling defeated. Brenda was watching me with barely concealed satisfaction. As I said, everything is legal. We will be finished with setup within the hour. The meeting starts at 7. I walked back to my house, my mind racing. This could not be legal. There was no way a homeowners association could just commandeer someone's private building. I immediately started searching for real estate attorneys in the area, but it was already past 6 in the evening, and every office I called went straight to voicemail. My stable was a 30 by 40 foot structure I had built specifically for my 3 horses. It had 6 stalls, a tack room, and a small storage area. I had run electricity out there, installed LED lighting, and even put in a small bathroom. It was not fancy, but it was mine, and it was perfect for my needs. Through my kitchen window, I watched as the HOA crew transformed my stable into a makeshift conference room. They set up folding tables in a U-shape, arranged chairs around them, and even brought in a portable podium. Brenda directed everything like a general commanding troops. At 6:45, cars started arriving. I recognized some of my neighbors, people I had waved to at the grocery store or chatted with at the gas station. They parked along my driveway and walked into my stable like it was the most natural thing in the world. Some of them glanced at my house, probably wondering if I was watching. I was. I counted 15 people total, including Brenda. They all settled into their seats, and through the open stable door, I could hear Brenda calling the meeting to order. The sound of her voice echoing through my building made me want to put my fist through a wall. Instead, I spent the evening researching Colorado property law and HOA regulations. What I found was disturbing. HOAs in Colorado had broad authority to create and enforce rules, and as long as they followed proper procedures for notifying residents and holding votes, they could implement almost anything. The key word was notify. If they had sent an email and I had not seen it, that was technically my problem, not theirs. But there was one thing they had overlooked: my well system. When I bought the property, the previous owner had mentioned that several of the newer houses on the edge of the development were not on the municipal water system either. The water company had not extended lines that far because it was not cost-effective for just a handful of houses. Instead, those 5 houses, including my own, had worked together to create a shared well system with my property as the main well site. I owned the well, the pump, the pressure tank, and all the main infrastructure. The other 4 houses had easement agreements that gave them access to water, and they paid me a monthly maintenance fee to cover electricity, repairs, and my time managing the system. It was a good arrangement. I made about $300 a month from the fees, which covered the costs and gave me a little extra for my trouble. But the key detail was that it was my well system on my property, and the easement agreements were contracts directly between me and those individual homeowners. The HOA had nothing to do with it, and Brenda Hutchins lived in one of those houses. The meeting ran until almost 9. I watched from my window as people filed out, chatting and laughing like they had just had a wonderful evening. Brenda was one of the last to leave, and she paused to lock the stable door with a padlock that definitely had not been there before. She had locked my own building and taken the key. I walked outside as her car pulled away, went to the stable and examined the lock. It was a heavy-duty padlock, probably $40 from the hardware store. I went to my workshop, grabbed my bolt cutters and snapped it off in one clean cut. Then I went inside to survey the damage. They had pushed all my tack and equipment into the storage room and crammed it in without any care for organization. My saddles were piled on top of each other, bridles were tangled in a heap, and bags of feed had been shoved into corners. The horses had been let out into the pasture, which was fine, but their stalls were now filled with boxes of HOA documents and office supplies. I spent 2 hours cleaning up and reorganizing everything. By the time I finished, it was past 11, and I was exhausted and furious. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with ideas for how to fight back. The next morning, I called every lawyer in a 30-mile radius. Most of them told me that HOA disputes were long, expensive, and rarely worth the fight. One attorney, a woman named Patricia Gomez, agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Her office was in Boulder, about 40 minutes from my property. Patricia was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my story while taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "This is complicated," she said. "On one hand, the HOA overstepped by taking over your building without proper consideration of your property rights. On the other hand, if they followed their internal procedures for amending bylaws and can prove they notified you, they have some legal ground to stand on." "But it is my property," I said. "How can they just take it?" "They are not taking it in the legal sense," Patricia explained. "They are claiming a right to use it temporarily for community purposes. It is similar to how an HOA can require you to give them access to your backyard if they need to repair a shared fence, even though it is your property. The problem is that this bylaw amendment is incredibly aggressive and probably exceeds their authority, but proving that in court will take time and money." "How much money, realistically?" "You are looking at $10,000 to $20,000 in legal fees, and it could take 6 months to a year to resolve. You would need to file an injunction to stop them from using the stable while the case is pending, then challenge the validity of the bylaw amendment, and possibly go after individual board members for overreach." I felt sick. "So they can just do whatever they want because fighting them costs too much." "Unfortunately, that is how a lot of HOA disputes work," Patricia said. "They count on homeowners not having the resources or willingness to fight back. My advice: document everything, show up to every HOA meeting, and try to get the bylaw amendment repealed through the proper channels. If that does not work, then we can talk about litigation." I left her office feeling even more defeated than before. I drove home in a daze, trying to figure out what to do. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Brenda's car parked by my stable again. She was walking around with another woman, pointing at different parts of the building and gesturing animatedly. I parked and got out. "Brenda, what are you doing now?" She turned with that same fake smile. "Oh, Marcus, good timing. This is Janet Reynolds, our HOA secretary. We are just doing a facility inspection to make sure the stable meets safety codes for public gatherings." "It is not a public gathering space," I said. "It is my private stable." Janet, a thin woman with glasses and a nervous disposition, checked something on her tablet. "Actually, under the new bylaws, any space designated for community use has to meet certain safety requirements. We need to verify that you have proper fire exits, adequate lighting, and accessible bathroom facilities. There is one door and a bathroom, I said. It is a stable, not a convention center. Brenda walked over to the electrical panel I had installed on the outside wall. We may need to upgrade the electrical system. If we are going to be hosting 20 or 30 people for meetings, we need to make sure the wiring can handle it. I stepped between her and the panel. You are not upgrading anything. This is still my property, and you are not making modifications without my permission. Brenda's smile finally dropped. If you do not cooperate with reasonable safety requirements, we will have no choice but to fine you for maintaining a hazardous community space. The fine is $500 per violation, and we have identified at least 3 violations so far. What violations? Janet read from her tablet in a monotone voice. Insufficient emergency exit signage, lack of ADA-compliant access ramps, and inadequate parking area designation. I almost laughed. This is a stable on a ranch. It does not need any of those things. It does if it is being used as a community meeting space, Brenda said. You have 30 days to bring everything up to code, or the fines will start accumulating. We will send you a detailed list of requirements via email. They walked back to Brenda's car, leaving me standing in my own driveway feeling like I had been punched in the gut. This was not just about using my stable anymore. They were trying to force me to spend thousands of dollars modifying my own building to meet their arbitrary standards. That evening, I sat down and made a list of every house that was connected to my well system. There were 4 besides my own. Brenda Hutchins on Meadowlark Lane, Tom and Susan Richardson on Bluebird Court, the Martinez family on Eagle Ridge Drive, and an elderly couple named the Johnsons on Sparrow Way. The easement agreements I had with each of them were simple 1-page documents that outlined their right to access water from my well, in exchange for the monthly maintenance fee. The agreements also included a clause that I had insisted on when we set everything up, which stated that I could terminate the agreement with 60 days written notice if the homeowner violated the terms or engaged in harassment or interference with my property rights. I had never imagined I would actually use that clause, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I spent the next day drafting a formal notice letter to Brenda. It stated that due to her role in the HOA's unauthorized takeover of my stable and the harassment I was experiencing, I was invoking the termination clause of our water easement agreement. She would have 60 days to make alternative arrangements for her water supply before I shut off her access to my well system. I printed the letter, put it in an envelope, and drove to her house that evening. She answered the door in yoga pants and a sweater, clearly not expecting visitors. Her expression went from surprise to annoyed when she saw me. "Marcus, what do you want?" I handed her the envelope. "This is official notice that I am terminating your water easement agreement. You have 60 days. She opened the envelope and scanned the letter, her face going pale and then red in quick succession. "You cannot do this." "Actually, I can. It is in the contract we both signed. You are interfering with my property rights and harassing me. Those are grounds for termination." Brenda's hands were shaking as she held the letter. "This is insane. You are going to cut off my water because of a simple disagreement about the HOA. You took over my building without permission and are now trying to force me to spend thousands of dollars modifying it to meet codes it does not legally need to meet. That is not a simple disagreement. That is harassment." "I will sue you," Brenda said, her voice rising. "You cannot just cut off someone's water. There are laws against that." "The easement agreement is a private contract between you and me," I said. "I checked with my lawyer. As long as I follow the 60-day notice period, I am within my rights to terminate it. You will need to drill your own well or get the water company to extend their lines to your house." Brenda's face was now bright red, and I could see a vein pulsing in her temple. "This is because I enforced the HOA rules. You are retaliating against me for doing my job." "No, I am enforcing my own contracts and protecting my property. If you want to avoid this, you can start by getting the HOA to rescind that bylaw amendment and stop using my stable." She slammed the door in my face. I walked back to my truck feeling a grim satisfaction. Maybe it was petty, but after everything she had put me through, it felt good to have some leverage. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA attorney. It was a formal cease and desist letter demanding that I restore water access to Brenda Hutchins immediately and threatening legal action if I did not comply. I forwarded it to Patricia Gomez with a note asking for her advice. She called me an hour later. "They do not have a leg to stand on. The easement agreement is clear and you followed the proper termination procedure. They are trying to intimidate you, but unless they can prove bad faith, which will be hard to do given the circumstances, you are in the clear." What if they do sue? Then we defend it, and honestly, we would probably countersue for the stable situation. Having them come after you actually strengthens your position because it shows a pattern of harassment. Keep that letter. It is evidence. Over the next week, the situation escalated. Brenda filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming I was engaging in retaliatory behavior and creating a public health hazard by threatening to cut off water access. A county inspector came out to investigate and spent an hour reviewing the well system and the easement agreements. He concluded that everything was in order and that the water shutoff was a private contract matter, not a county issue. The HOA announced an emergency meeting to discuss the water crisis. I showed up uninvited. The meeting was being held in my stable, of course, and when I walked in, the room went silent. Brenda was at the podium and her eyes widened when she saw me. "This is a closed meeting," she said. "HOA members only." "I am a member of this HOA," I replied, taking a seat in the back row. "And since you are meeting in my building, I think I have a right to be here." Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tom Richardson, one of my other water customers, raised his hand. "Brenda, maybe we should hear Marcus out. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." Brenda shot him a look. "The issue on the table is that Marcus is attempting to shut off water access to my home in retaliation for legitimate HOA business. This is unacceptable and possibly illegal." I stood up. "The issue on the table is that the HOA, under your leadership, illegally took over my private property and is now trying to force me to make expensive modifications to my own building. The water shutoff is a separate matter involving a private contract that has nothing to do with the HOA. You are only terminating the agreement because I am the HOA president," Brenda shot back. "I am terminating it because you are harassing me and interfering with my property rights. The fact that you are also the HOA president is just a coincidence." A woman in the front row, someone I did not recognize, spoke up. "Can we just vote to undo the bylaw change? This seems like a lot of trouble for a meeting space." Brenda's jaw tightened. "The bylaw was properly enacted and serves an important community function. We are not going to be bullied into reversing legitimate HOA decisions because one resident does not want to cooperate." "Cooperate?" I said, my voice rising. "You took over my building without asking. You put a lock on my own property. You are threatening me with fines for not making modifications I never agreed to. That is not cooperation. That is theft." Tom Richardson stood up. "I move that we table the stable issue and revisit the bylaw amendment at next month's meeting. This needs more discussion, and clearly Marcus was not properly involved in the original decision." Several people nodded in agreement. Brenda looked furious. "We already voted on this." "Then we can vote again," Tom said. "That is how democracy works, Brenda." The motion passed with 8 votes in favor and 6 against. Brenda looked like she wanted to flip the table. She adjourned the meeting abruptly, and people filed out quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. As I was leaving, Tom caught up with me. "Look, Marcus, I get why you are angry, but shutting off Brenda's water is not going to help anything. It just makes you look vindictive." "She started this," I said. "I am just defending myself. I know, but there are better ways. Work with us." A lot of people on the board think the stable thing was a bad idea. Give us a chance to fix it." I wanted to believe him, but I was too angry and too tired. "She has 60 days. If the HOA reverses the bylaw and stays out of my stable, I will consider reinstating her easement." But I am not backing down first. Over the next 2 weeks, things got worse before they got better. Brenda started a phone campaign, calling other HOA members and neighbors to turn them against me. She framed the water shutoff as a cruel and dangerous retaliation, conveniently leaving out the part where she had stolen my stable. Some people believed her. I started getting dirty looks at the grocery store and the post office, but others saw through it. Tom Richardson organized a petition to repeal the bylaw amendment, and within a week, he had signatures from 30 of the 50 households in the HOA. The Martinez family, who were also on my well system, came by to express their support and assure me they were not worried about the water situation because they trusted I was handling it fairly. The Johnsons, the elderly couple, were less understanding. Mrs. Johnson called me in tears, begging me not to shut off their water because they were on a fixed income and could not afford to drill a new well. I assured her that I had no intention of terminating their easement, only Brenda's. She seemed relieved but still worried that the whole system might collapse if things kept escalating. I was worried about that too. The well system was designed to serve 5 houses, and if one of them dropped off, it would not cause problems immediately, but it would change the cost structure. I would need to recalculate the maintenance fees, and that might upset the other homeowners, but I was committed now. Brenda had pushed me too far, and I was not going to let her walk all over me just to keep the peace. The second HOA meeting happened 3 weeks later. This time, I arrived early and sat right in the front row. Brenda glared at me but did not say anything. The meeting started with routine business, but then Tom Richardson brought up the bylaw amendment as new business. "I move that we repeal the amendment allowing the HOA to designate private structures for community use," he said. "The amendment has caused significant conflict and appears to exceed the HOA's authority over private property." The room erupted in discussion. Some people argued that the HOA needed flexibility to address community needs. Others pointed out that taking over someone's building without real compensation was wrong. Brenda tried to maintain control, but it was clear she was losing support. The vote was called. 12 in favor of repeal, 8 against. The bylaw amendment was overturned. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. She tried to move on to the next agenda item, but Tom was not done. I also move that we formally apologize to Marcus Webb for the inconvenience and stress caused by this situation, and that we compensate him for any expenses related to the unauthorized use of his stable. That motion passed 10-9. One person abstained. After the meeting, Brenda cornered me in the parking lot. "Are you happy now? You have turned the entire board against me and made me look like a villain." "You did that to yourself," I said. "All you had to do was ask permission to use my stable. Instead, you tried to bully me into compliance." "This is on you." "And the water?" she asked, her voice tight. "Are you going to restore my access now?" I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to make her suffer a little longer, to let her sweat it out for the full 60 days. But I was not cruel, and dragging it out would not accomplish anything. "I will reinstate your easement on one condition," I said. "You resign as HOA president. This community does not need someone in charge who thinks it is okay to steal from her neighbors." Brenda's face went through several shades of red and purple. "You cannot force me to resign." "No, I cannot. But I can choose who I do business with, and I am not doing business with you as long as you are in a position to harass me. So you decide. Stay president and figure out how to get water to your house, or step down and keep your access to my well." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Fine. I will submit my resignation at the next board meeting." "But this is not over, Marcus. You have made an enemy today." "You made an enemy when you stole my stable," I replied. "I am just defending myself." True to her word, Brenda resigned 2 weeks later. The HOA elected Tom Richardson as the new president, and one of the first things he did was draft a formal apology letter to me and arrange for a payment of $2,000 to cover my time and expenses related to the stable situation. It was not a fortune, but it was something. I reinstated Brenda's water easement the same day her resignation became official. I figured there was no point in drawing it out any further. She had lost her position, her reputation in the community was damaged, and I had made my point. For a while, things were quiet. I went back to my normal routine of taking care of my horses, maintaining the well system, and enjoying the peace of rural Colorado. The HOA meetings returned to boring discussions about road maintenance and snow removal, which was exactly how I liked it, but Brenda was not done with me. About 2 months after her resignation, I started noticing problems with my well system. The pressure would drop randomly, the pump would cycle on and off more frequently than normal, and the water quality seemed off. I spent several weekends troubleshooting, checking the pressure tank, inspecting the lines, and testing the water. Everything seemed fine mechanically, but the problems persisted. Then one morning, I went out to check the well head and found the access panel slightly ajar. Someone had been tampering with it. I immediately checked the security camera I had installed on the stable after the HOA incident. The camera had night vision, and when I reviewed the footage from the previous night, I saw a figure approaching the well head around 2 in the morning. The person was wearing dark clothing and a hood, but the body shape and movement looked familiar. I backed up the footage and watched it again, this time zooming in as much as the resolution would allow. When the figure bent down to open the access panel, the hood slipped back just enough to reveal a face. It was Brenda. I felt a chill run down my spine. She was sabotaging my well system. I called Patricia Gomez immediately. She advised me to preserve all the footage and file a police report. I did both that same day. The officer who took my report was a young guy named Deputy Harris, and he seemed skeptical at first, but when I showed him the footage, his expression turned serious. "This is vandalism and possibly reckless endangerment," he said. "If she is contaminating a well system that serves multiple households, that is a serious crime. We will need to investigate." He took copies of the footage and my statement and said someone would follow up within a few days. In the meantime, I had the well water tested by a professional lab. The results came back showing elevated levels of chlorine and traces of soap. Someone had deliberately poured chemicals into my well. I was furious and terrified at the same time. Contaminating a water supply was not just petty revenge, it was dangerous. People could get sick. I immediately sent out notices to all 4 of the other households on my well system, warning them not to drink the water until I could flush the system and get it retested. The Martinez family was horrified. Mrs. Johnson cried on the phone when I told her. Tom Richardson was angry and promised to do whatever he could to help. Everyone wanted to know who had done it, but I did not want to say anything until the police finished their investigation. It took 3 days to fully flush the well system and get clean test results. I had to rent equipment, buy filters, and spend countless hours monitoring the process. The total cost was close to $5,000. Deputy Harris came by with a detective named Sarah Palmer. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She reviewed the security footage multiple times, asked me detailed questions about the well system and my history with Brenda, and took extensive notes. "We are going to bring her in for questioning," Detective Palmer said. "Based on this footage and the water test results, we have enough for charges. Tampering with a water supply is a felony in Colorado." 2 days later, Brenda was arrested. The news spread through the community like wildfire. People were shocked and horrified. The HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation, and Tom Richardson made a formal statement condemning Brenda's actions and expressing the board's full support for me and the other affected families. Brenda hired a lawyer and tried to fight the charges, claiming the footage was inconclusive and that I was framing her out of revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. In addition to my security footage, Detective Palmer found records showing that Brenda had purchased large quantities of chlorine and industrial soap from a hardware store 2 days before the contamination occurred. Her credit card statements and the store's security footage confirmed it. The case went to trial 4 months later. I had to testify, describing everything from the stable takeover to the water easement termination to the well contamination. Brenda's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive neighbor who had provoked his client into desperation. But the prosecution countered by pointing out that poisoning a water supply was never an acceptable response to a civil dispute. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Brenda was found guilty on charges of criminal mischief, vandalism, and reckless endangerment. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to me and the other affected families for the cost of cleaning and testing the well system. The total restitution amount was just over $22,000, covering my costs, the lab fees, the legal expenses, and compensation for the stress and disruption caused to everyone on the well system. I attended the sentencing hearing. Brenda looked smaller somehow, her confidence stripped away by the weight of her actions. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and gave a rambling speech about how the stress of the HOA had driven her to a breaking point and how she never intended to hurt anyone. She claimed she was just trying to scare me into cooperating. The judge was not impressed. "Miss Hutchins, you contaminated a water supply that served multiple families, including an elderly couple and a family with young children. Your actions could have resulted in serious illness or even death. The fact that you claim you were only trying to scare someone makes it worse, not better. You are an educated adult who chose to commit a dangerous and reckless crime. You will face the consequences." After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The whole ordeal had taken nearly a year of my life, cost me tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and well repairs, and caused more stress than I had ever imagined a homeowners association could create. But it was over. Tom Richardson and the new HOA board went out of their way to make amends. They passed a resolution prohibiting the HOA from claiming any rights to private structures on member properties without explicit written consent and compensation. They also established a dispute resolution process to address conflicts before they escalated to legal action. The Martinez family invited me over for dinner to thank me for protecting the well system, even though it had cost me so much. Mrs. Johnson baked me cookies and left them on my porch with a note saying I was a hero. Tom Richardson and I became friends, occasionally meeting up for beers and commiserating about the insanity of HOA politics. My stable remained my stable. My horses were happy. My well system was clean and functioning properly, and my property, all 10 acres of it, was finally peaceful again. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that homeowners associations can wield enormous power if left unchecked, and that bullies like Brenda will keep pushing until someone pushes back. I learned that standing up for your rights is expensive and exhausting, but sometimes it is the only option. And I learned that most people, when given the choice, will choose to do the right thing if you give them the chance. The Eagle Ridge Estates HOA is a different organization now. Tom Richardson runs it with transparency and respect for homeowners' rights. Meetings are boring again, focused on practical issues like road repairs and snow removal contracts. No one tries to take over anyone's buildings, and disputes are handled through conversation rather than threats and fines. As for Brenda, I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house after getting out of prison and moved to Arizona. Good riddance. The new owners are a nice couple with 2 dogs, and they have been model neighbors. My life returned to normal, or as normal as life on a small ranch in Colorado can be. I wake up early, feed the horses, check the well system, and spend my days working on projects around the property. The HOA sends me polite emails about upcoming meetings and community events, and I occasionally attend if the agenda looks interesting. I never did get another lock put on my stable. I figured if someone was determined enough to mess with me, a lock would not stop them. But I did upgrade my security cameras and add motion-activated lights around the perimeter of my property, just in case. The whole experience taught me that peace and quiet come at a price. Sometimes that price is vigilance, sometimes it is legal fees, and sometimes it is the willingness to cut off someone's water to prove a point. I do not regret any of it. My property is mine, my rights are protected, and my community is better for having gone through the mess and come out the other side. The HOA learned that they cannot just steamroll people, and I learned that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit them where it hurts. In the end, justice was served. Brenda faced consequences for her crimes, I was compensated for my losses, and the HOA reformed itself into something reasonable. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was fair, and that is all I ever wanted. Now, when I sit on my back porch watching the sunset over my property, I do it with the satisfaction of knowing that no one is going to take it from me. Not the HOA, not Brenda, not anyone. This land is mine, and I fought to keep it that way. And if another HOA president ever gets any bright ideas about converting my stable into a meeting hall, well, they have been warned. I have cameras, I have a good lawyer, and I control the water. That is a combination nobody wants to mess with. Life in Eagle Ridge Estates is peaceful now. The horses graze in the pasture, the well pump hums quietly in the background, and the mountains stand silent and eternal in the distance. This is what I moved to Colorado for, this exact feeling of space and freedom and ownership. The HOA drama is just a memory now, a crazy story I tell at parties when someone asks about rural living. People always react with shock and disbelief, and I have to assure them that yes, it really happened, and yes, homeowners associations can really be that out of control. But I also tell them about Tom Richardson and the other board members who stood up and did the right thing. I tell them about my neighbors who supported me and signed petitions and showed up when it mattered. Because the story is not just about one tyrannical HOA president. It is about a community that ultimately chose to do better. The stable stands as a testament to all of it. It is back to being what it was always meant to be, a home for my horses, a place where I can work and think and enjoy the simple satisfaction of rural life. No more folding chairs, no more podiums, no more HOA meetings. Just hay and leather and the smell of horses and the sound of hooves on dirt. I added a small plaque to the stable wall, nothing fancy, just a piece of wood with some words burned into it. Private property. No trespassing. This means you, HOA. It makes me smile every time I see it. The well system continues to serve its 5 households without incident. I collect the maintenance fees every month. I keep the equipment in good working order, and everyone has clean, reliable water. The easement agreements are still in place, and I have no plans to terminate any of them as long as people treat me with respect. Brenda's former house on Meadowlark Lane is thriving under its new owners. They planted flowers in the front yard, repainted the shutters, and generally made the place look more welcoming than it ever did under Brenda's tenure. I wave to them when I drive by and they wave back. No drama, no conflict, just normal neighborly interaction. The legal bills took a while to pay off, even with the restitution money. Patricia Gomez earned every penny I paid her. She fought hard for me, gave me solid advice, and never once suggested I should just give up and let the HOA win. I sent her a Christmas card last year with a photo of my horses and a note thanking her for everything. Deputy Harris and Detective Palmer both stopped by a few months after the trial to check on me and make sure everything was okay. They said it was one of the stranger cases they had worked on, but they were glad it had a clear resolution. Detective Palmer joked that she would think twice before buying a house in an HOA after seeing what I went through. The other families on my well system threw me a thank you barbecue last summer. It was held at the Richardsons' house, and about 20 people showed up. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and told stories about the craziness of the previous year. Mrs. Johnson made a toast to the most stubborn man in Colorado, and everyone laughed and clinked their glasses. It felt good to be appreciated. I have thought a lot about what I would have done differently, and honestly, not much. Maybe I could have been more diplomatic in the beginning, tried harder to work with Brenda instead of immediately going on the defensive. But I do not think it would have mattered. She was determined to exert control, and people like that do not respond to diplomacy. They only respond to consequences. Cutting off her water was extreme, I will admit that. It was a power move designed to hurt her and force her to back down. But it worked. It gave me leverage when I had none, and it made her realize that she could not just bully me without facing repercussions. Yes, it escalated the conflict. Yes, it led to her sabotaging my well. But it also ultimately led to her arrest and the HOA reforms that made the community better for everyone. Would I do it again? Probably. Because the alternative was letting her win, and I was not willing to do that. The experience changed me in some ways. I am more cautious now, more aware of the potential for conflict even in seemingly peaceful places. I read every HOA email carefully, I attend more meetings than I used to, and I keep detailed records of everything related to my property. I also invested in better security systems and made sure all my contracts and agreements are airtight. But I also became more connected to my community. I know my neighbors better now. I understand how local politics work. I have relationships with people I never would have met if not for the conflict. In a weird way, Brenda's attempt to control me ended up making me more invested in the place I live. The horses do not care about any of it, of course. They just want their feed on time and enough space to run around. I envy their simplicity sometimes. No HOA, no bylaws, no legal battles. Just grass and sunshine and the occasional apple as a treat. I have started working on a book about my experience. Nothing fancy, just a straightforward account of what happened and what I learned. I figure there are probably a lot of people out there dealing with similar HOA nightmares, and maybe my story will help them feel less alone or give them ideas for how to fight back. Patricia Gomez offered to write the foreword, which I thought was a nice touch. The title I am working with is "The HOA Tried to Steal My Stable, so I Cut Off Their Water." It is a bit provocative, but it gets the point across. My hope is that it will serve as both a warning and a guide, a warning to HOAs that they cannot just do whatever they want, and a guide to homeowners on how to stand up for their rights. The landscape around my property changes with the seasons. In winter, the mountains are covered in snow and the air is crisp and clean. In spring, wildflowers bloom across the pastures and the creek that runs through my land swells with snowmelt. Summer brings long, warm days perfect for riding horses and working outside. Fall turns the aspen trees gold and the air smells like wood smoke from distant fireplaces. Through all of it, my property remains constant. My stable, my well, my land. They are mine, and I protected them when it mattered most. That is not a small thing. In a world where so much feels out of our control, being able to defend what is yours is meaningful. I still see Tom Richardson regularly. We have become good friends, bonding over the shared trauma of HOA drama. He jokes that his time as president has been boring compared to Brenda's tenure, and he says it like it is a compliment. Boring is good when it comes to HOAs. Boring means people are respecting boundaries and following rules and not trying to take over each other's buildings. The Martinez family invited me to their daughter's quinceañera last year. It was a beautiful celebration, full of music and dancing and incredible food. I felt honored to be included, and it reminded me that community is not just about property lines and bylaws. It is about relationships and shared experiences, and being there for each other when it counts. Mrs. Johnson passed away last winter. She was 87 and had lived a full life. Her husband moved to a retirement home in Denver to be closer to his kids, and their house was sold to a young couple expecting their first baby. At the funeral, Mr. Johnson pulled me aside and thanked me for taking care of the water all those years, and for standing up to Brenda when she tried to poison the well. He said his wife had always admired my courage, even when she was worried about the conflict. That meant more to me than any legal victory. The new HOA board has been surprisingly proactive about preventing future conflicts. They hired a professional management company to handle the day-to-day operations, which took a lot of pressure off the volunteer board members. They also brought in a mediator to conduct training on conflict resolution and property rights. I attended one of the sessions, and it was actually quite informative. My horses are getting older now, but they are still healthy and happy. I have been thinking about getting a younger horse to train, maybe a rescue that needs a good home. The stable has plenty of room, and I enjoy the work of caring for them. It keeps me grounded and gives me a sense of purpose beyond just maintaining my property. The well system continues to operate smoothly. I have had to replace the pump once and do some minor repairs to the pressure tank, but overall it has been reliable. The monthly fees cover the costs with a little left over, and the other homeowners always pay on time. It is a good arrangement, and I am glad we set it up the way we did all those years ago. I think about Brenda sometimes, wondering what she is doing in Arizona and whether she learned anything from what happened. I hope she did. I hope she realized that you cannot just bully people and expect no consequences. But I also do not waste too much energy on her. She is out of my life, and that is what matters. The security footage from the night she sabotaged my well is still saved on multiple hard drives. I will probably keep it forever, not because I want to dwell on what happened, but because it is a reminder of how far someone will go when they feel they have been wronged. It is also evidence of the importance of being prepared and protecting yourself. If I had not installed those cameras, I never would have been able to prove what she did, and she might have gotten away with it. The restitution payments came through in installments over 2 years. I used the money to upgrade my well system with better filtration, to pay off my legal bills, and to make some improvements to my property that I had been putting off. I also donated some of it to a local charity that helps people in rural areas access clean water. It felt right to turn something negative into something positive. Life has a way of moving forward, even after major upheavals. The drama with Brenda and the HOA feels like ancient history now, even though it was only a few years ago. New people have moved into the neighborhood, and they do not know anything about what happened. To them, I am just the guy with the horses and the well system, a friendly neighbor who waves when they drive by, but the people who were here during the conflict remember. They remember the meetings and the arguments and the trial. They remember how close things came to falling apart and how the community pulled together to fix it. That shared memory has created a bond among us, a sense that we survived something difficult and came out better for it. The stable still stands strong, a simple structure of wood and metal that has become a symbol of something larger. It represents the right to private property, the importance of standing up to bullies, and the resilience of a community that chooses to do better. Every time I walk into that building, I feel a sense of pride and satisfaction that I fought for it and won. My life in Eagle Ridge Estates is exactly what I wanted when I moved here. It is peaceful, productive, and free from the kind of petty tyranny that Brenda tried to impose. I have my horses, my land, my well system, and my freedom. That is all I ever needed. And if someone ever asks me for advice on dealing with an out-of-control HOA, I will tell them the truth. Document everything, know your rights, get a good lawyer, and do not be afraid to use whatever leverage you have. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit them where it hurts. In my case, that meant cutting off the water. In someone else's case, it might mean something different. But the principle is the same: stand up for yourself, even when it is hard, even when it is expensive, even when everyone tells you it is not worth it. Because it is worth it. Your property, your rights, and your peace of mind are worth fighting for. And when you win, when you finally reclaim what is yours and restore balance to your life, the satisfaction is immeasurable. I sit on my back porch now, just like I did on that evening 3 years ago when I first saw the construction crew pulling up to my stable. But this time, there is no threat on the horizon. There are no HOA board members plotting to take my property. There is just the sunset, the mountains, the sound of horses in the pasture, and the quiet knowledge that I did what I had to do to protect what is mine. And that, more than anything, is worth everything I went through to get here.